as I say this, I don't want to sound egotistical, like I'm the king of this culture, because I've learned the hard way. If you don't meticulously manage them, when I say manage, I mean, just be attentive to them, I guess, you'll fail. I mean, I thought I was, Midas after a couple of these startups. And I had one where I didn't pay attention to the culture, and it was an awful culture. And so as I get older, I pay attention to, how lucky I was at so young in life, and to pay attention to the culture.
That's perfect.
Starting your route to retirement.
Welcome to the Guided Retirement Show. I'm your host, Dean Barber. All right, so normally on the Guided Retirement Show, we're talking about money. Today, we're going to talk about life. We're going to do an interview with one of the most fascinating people that I have met in all of the podcasts that we've done here on the Guided Retirement Show. His name, Jeff Alholm. He is the CEO of Digital Aerolus. And Jeff has spent years inventing new technology and devices that are used daily by millions of people. You're going to be fascinated by the technology that Jeff is working on today and, in fact, is in use by companies all around the globe. Please enjoy this interview with Jeff Alholm, CEO of Digital Aerolus. So, Jeff, welcome to the Guided Retirement Show. It's such a pleasure to have you here. And, I think the world around us is ever-changing, and we've seen that. And we went through, back in the early part of the last century, the Industrial Revolution, and I don't think people had any concept of how that Industrial Revolution was going to change the way that people live their everyday lives. And then along comes the technological revolution, and that's the world that you live in. And many people think, well, the technological revolution, it's already happened. But I would argue, and I want to get your take on this, is the technological revolution in its early stages or its late stages right now?
I love history. I read a lot. Let's just go with that, at least. And mostly history. So I think historically, there's always a revolution going on, right? There's, people were upset when the looms were invented to make cloth, right? So the Luddites came through and threw their wrenches and shoes into the works because they thought it was immoral that machines were doing the work of humans. Now we are in the robotic revolution, where there's talk of self-driving cars, and should you even own a car, because now you're going to call the Uber of the future, and a personless car is going to show up and drive you to all your appointments more efficiently, safely, in a more ethical way, is the argument, than you owning a car. And, are truck drivers going away? Are there enough truck drivers in America today? No, by the way. So there's a lot of revolution going on. And, it is how we handle modernity, right, is a subject that has been around for millennia. There's theological arguments of handle modernity. There's historic arguments of how we handle modernity. We're in one of those right now. I'm in the business of providing, intelligent, autonomous robotics on flying platforms. Is that going to take jobs away or add to them? That's the question. But the jobs that are going to be here 10 years from now because of our technology will absolutely be different jobs, right?
And all the stuff you're talking about, Jeff, is all about technology, right? Because without the technology, you can't have the AI.
Well, any technology advanced enough is indistinguishable from magic, goes the Alan Kay quote, right? So we have different technological, continuums here. Technology can happen, or advancement can happen in all kinds of planes of life. I've been surprised during this pandemic how we as a society have pivoted around virtual meetings, right? So we're an essential business. We don't require everyone to come to work, but we require that everyone's working, right? But we've handled and pivoted around that some people should do their jobs away from the office or should be here on some days. And if you had asked me before the pandemic, would it had gone as well for us as it's turned out, I would have said no way. But again, I don't know if it's technology, but my resistance to technology has proven to be, a technologist, has proved to be ill-formed.
You
So
know, I would probably sit on the same side of the table with you there, Jeff, because I was forever under the impression that if we were forced to work from home, that we wouldn't be as productive. And I, like you, am super pleased and surprised with how our organization has not only adapted quickly, but been able to thrive in that environment and adapting to the technology. So I think that it's twofold. One, it's the technology that's out there, but two, it's people's willingness today to adapt to the technology in a much faster form than maybe what our parents or our grandparents would have been willing to adapt. I mean, you were telling me a story before we came on about your father's adaptation to the smartphone, right? And his initial reaction. I think that's a funny story, so you should tell it.
Yeah, just my dad, like yours, you were talking about how your dad said, "Oh, I'll never have a phone, a wireless phone," and then got a flip phone and now has a smartphone. My dad, adapted quickly. He wanted a phone. He at the time was running a large public company, but I came home one day, and at the time we were under contract doing some work with Apple and some partners of Apple. So we created, before the iPhone, there was a pre-iPhone to the iPhone based on the Apple Newton, which has got me in court a couple times, mostly in defense work on Apple's intellectual property. And so I'm on someone's quick dial there in Cupertino. And so I remember showing my dad this first smartphone. There's one on the wall here. And I remember him saying to me, "That's the silliest thing I've ever seen. Again, why would I have a computer in my pocket?" Right.
Right.
And in the end, there's part of him that uses his smartphone probably more than I do on a daily existence. Again, I'm not saying he's as comfortable at 85 with some aspects of it, but I find he spends more time in front of his computer than I do in a day, and I'm a computer guy, right? But part of it is that he adapted. We resist. Again, he grumbled at me. I very clearly remember, "I'll never own a, bleepity bleep computer, because, that's why I have a secretarial pool at work to do this for."
Right.
And now he's the king of his Macintosh environment, and he's very, very proficient at it. But he also goes to classes whenever he has a question, if there's new things. He's the king of the smartphone. And again, he arguably with me as his son, he was always, pushed in his face this technology, right? And he would shrug his shoulders.
So we have to have the adaptation to the technology. Now, let's talk about your business for a little bit, Jeff. And I know you've had a long history of creating all kinds of amazing technology that has changed the way that people live on a daily basis. The robotics, the self-flying drones. How did that come about, and what's involved with that, and how do you see that changing industry and eventually maybe even people's lives?
Okay, I'm going to parse that into two questions, which is, how did it come about, and then how will it affect the future? Is that
absolutely
that fair?
Yep.
Okay. I'll make how it came about simple. I by nature am an applied mathematician and electrical engineer. It's the voodoo I do. And that's gave birth to products that generally have that as their core, whether it's Wi-Fi or the phone example, or some medical devices. On this one, I was asked by a friend to look at some technology what at the time had left it wasn't at Caltech, but it was developed by a bunch of former professors at Caltech. And it originally was looking at the problem of, solving deep space navigation, but ultimately they were applying it to the concept of navigating drones inside and autonomy. I'm not saying they had really honed the sword, the point of that, as articulately as I'm saying, and I'm not suggesting I'm the articulate one here, but you get beaten into the point that where the market is. So that was the original generation. We put $10 million of mostly our and private money into it in Kansas City and created Digital Aerolus. We primarily sell products primarily for inspection. So inside mines, nuclear reactors, coal burners, where you want to go up and look at the injection port, inside of commercial spaces, meaning inside of chemical companies, pipe work. You can't get there easily. It's real funny. Dow Chemicals recently announced publicly they were getting rid of step ladders by 2024. And their argument is if a step ladder is needed, go get a confined space drone. I would argue we're really the only confined space stable drone. There's some kind of jokey things that fly in balls, but they mostly achieve their stability by being unstable. They roll on walls and things. Not very conducive for most environments. But by using this advanced math, and now it's a 32-dimensional mathematical operators, and we have a plethora of patents covering our work, we're able to fly stably indoors. And now we have a new product line we're just starting to sell, which then also creates autonomy around the drone. There was some autonomy before, but it senses the environment, not for stability, but for to be aware of the environment so that you can measure the room, you can be aware of where you are in the room, that if there's a problem, ultimately the platform can come back through the serpentine path that it entered all these pipes and come back to your hand and land automatically.
Now, how big is How big is this drone that you're talking about? Is it pretty small?
Yeah, I don't know if you can see it behind me.
Oh, here. Yeah, okay, up on top of the shelf.
Well, it's the one below it here. Let me get it. So that's all. This is a version old. So this is the last version, but the new one is the exact same size. It has new imagers and it has a series of sensors on top. And I should have gone and grabbed the new product before I started this call, but it's exactly this size. It's smaller than a manhole cover. So we have clients that fly down the manhole and start flying. So if you go online and watch the video, you'll see somebody actually go in a manhole, fly, and then exit. By the way, an absolutely cool video.
Yeah.
Because they're inspecting the electrical works in Valdez, Alaska. And Valdez, Alaska generates its electricity a bunch of ways, but one of them, or three ways. One of them is a reservoir where the penstock has to be inside of a mountain. It's carved into the mountain so that it doesn't freeze up. So the manhole, you go down, they inspect it, and they zoom out.
Wow.
Through the water as it exits this cave.
So this is far more advanced than you see, somebody that's flying a drone, they're inspecting a roof, they're looking at high lines, they're doing those stuff. But those are all drones that are powered by a human that's looking at a video screen that's seeing what the drone actually sees. You say yours are autonomous. So how do they know where to go? How do they know what to do? You have to have a human program that before it happens?
Well, yeah. So I'm sorry, your question, I want to answer like three different ways. So
go ahead.
The engineer, part ADD here. I would say, first of all, a drone that flies above a roof is very intelligent, but its intelligence is really derived by seeing GPS. So it sees the world in a GPS grid. It's stable in that GPS grid. The instant you fly in a doorway with that outdoor drone, it will go catawampus and crash. Now, you can take that same drone, if it's a relatively common drone, and you can start inside, and then it will go through, what I call dumb bunny mode. It will keep asking you, are you really this stupid to want to fly inside? It will start flying, and it will fly stably inside because it will see what we call optical flow, which is the technology that an optical mouse uses. So it's like a flying optical mouse.
Okay.
And as long as it sees a texture underneath the drone, all the lights are on. You don't fly over concrete. You're not over water. And it's working that day. And it had originally got its bearing inside of a GPS environment where it creates what we call the moments of inertia tables. It will fly indoors until you fly outdoors, and then it will crash again because it got lost. Or if someone turns the lights off, it will crash. So what we do on first, and it's don't overlook this, is that we're stable in all those environments. When we're outdoors, it's stable without GPS. When you fly through the doorway, it remains stable. If you start inside, it's stable. Our drone doesn't care if it's around magnetic interference. It's stable. That creates havoc on all other drones in the world. What we do on top of that, there is some AI and autonomy in that. And we call it semi-autonomous behavior, as it feels the airflow differences of the wall or the wind in a mine, or even the ceiling, and it will back off. Other drones, if they hit anything, they crash. We don't. So we don't do collision avoidance like everyone else. We feel the difference and we back off appropriately. But we don't, if you want to push our drone against the wall, it will go against the wall because you might want to be looking in a hole in the wall. If someone turns all the lights off in that room and it's total dark, then it will still fly stable. You might not be able to see much, but you can turn the lights on the front of the camera on to see what you're inspecting. Now, with the new drones, it's now also sensing the room. So it will say, okay, this is a 10 by 20 room. What would you like me to do? Well, I'd like you to, fly to every corner and come back to the center. And you can tell it to do that. We believe most people will be doing that in the first generation use of the new product, the 130, will be doing in what we call semi-autonomous mode. You'll still be flying it, but if you take your hands off the control and go get a cup of coffee, it will be exactly where it was when you came back and looking at the exact same spot. And if you want to tell it to go a week later to go to the exact same spot and to look at the exact same bolt at the exact same angle, it will do that.
Wow.
That's what our customers require, meaning, our bread and butter is inspecting under a bridge or, like I said, a mine or the reactors or the waterworks of LDs, right?
So you're able to do that in a safe manner where typically you're going to have some personal risk to do that if you don't have the autonomous drone that you have.
Right. I mean, in autonomy in this case, autonomy is a really funny word. There's an argument. We do nothing autonomous if you really want to take it to its extreme, right? And believe it or not, we argue about these things among a bunch of geekwads here at our shop. Is that autonomy is awareness. You and I are autonomous. We make decisions. If we fly into a room and the door gets closed, that the drone being able to know what to do if someone closed the door behind it is true autonomy. We can't do that yet, but we can do some things that are autonomous. It can sense where that bolt is and come back to the same spot. So just so you understand, there's a huge continuum of autonomy. There's an argument that the autonomous cars that are driving today are not autonomous at all. You get my point.
So so let's talk about that, because I think the self-driving vehicle is, to me, it's fascinating,
yeah,
but at the same time, it's terrifying. Okay. And so how does that work relative to the technology that your drones are using?
Well, first of all, by the way, autonomous cars fail without GPS. So, think of it, we're trying to solve the other end of the continuum, think of it, we're solving the problem of ultimately a car and how does it drive if no GPS is around. Now, by the way, there are other people like Intel's Mobileye division that are working on, creating, constantly updating maps based on what I call, sense fiducials or sense markings as you drive. We're doing something similar to that. We're solving the problem using an entirely different technological set. No one in the world is doing what we're doing. No one. Is that, we use, this form of conformal multidimensional math. And because of that, we handle sensors radically different as every sensed array. So a car, as it drives, self-drives now, has a bunch of visual sensors or even LiDARs, the things spinning on the top of the roof.
Right.
Or now we're going to see LiDARs, what we call flash LiDARs, in the corner of the BMW or whatever car you have. BMW is one of the first to deploy it. The reason I mention it or them is that, and it will sense that environment. One of the things that we do, but one of the problems with the approach today taken by autonomous cars is the computational expense of handling all those sensors is breathtaking. So I was at a recent thing last year where I was listening to it was a geekwa thing of like 30 people in the room, but it was the head of Alphabet's Waymo division, so Google.
Right.
And he was talking about how much processing power it takes to resolve and to drive their self-driving Volvos. And they're not there yet. But he was saying there's actually over 300 different processing elements. And remember, every computer chip, its problem is heat and power. They have to liquid cool the PCB boards, the printed circuit boards, have water troughs in them. It's folded circuits, and it has to have a water chiller in the trunk with the hardware to keep it cool enough so that it continues to work.
Wow.
Just think about that. That is one of the things that we do is our technology reduces the computational expense of resolving all of these sensed elements by orders of magnitude, not 10 times, more than that. And it's the way that we're able to handle what's called relative framing in this geometric space. So, we think we have a solution for a number of even automotive problems. What we're focused on right now is flying our confined space drones because that's what puts, food on the table. But that ultimately our larger play as Digital Aerolus is how, as we as a technology provider, enable things that fly, dive, swim, or drive, as we jokingly say, or not jokingly. So meaning our technology, why it's clearly demonstratable on our platforms, meaning, you can, you always have to be careful when someone makes outlandish claims, right? The beauty of our set of claims is, you don't believe me? Here's the control, fly it, turn all the lights off, right? And I can't tell you how many extremely smart people have looked at us, and we have smart people in house, and have said, no, you're a bullshitter. That's not true. And it's like, what do you mean? You just flew it. Yeah, but you're doing some trick. What trick am I doing? But the abstraction is that what we do here is applicable to, in some ways, all autonomous platforms. And how we make that transition, is the challenge in front of the management and directors of this business moving forward, is how do we continue to add value? Because in the end, like your business, our business is about creating value for shareholders. How do we take our valuation from, tenfold jumps? Our competitors, probably the closest competitor we have, just raised money at $1 billion valuation. How do we make sure we're following that valuation? Because our technology is applicable to, I think, even more things than the example I just gave.
So let me ask you a question, Jeff. What you're saying, I'm sensing, and make sure that I'm thinking in the right direction. Let's go back to the invention of the pre-Apple iPhone, the first smartphone, and think about the applications of the smartphone today and the number of jobs created and the way that people's lives have changed because of that. And it was that new technology. The new technology that you're discussing today sounds to me like it could wind up in a similar fashion to what the first smartphone did, of being part of an everyday life for millions of people across the globe. Is that kind of what you're seeing? I mean, I know your focus today is pretty down to, what it is that's making your organization, your company money today. But do you see a bigger application that can help people live better lives and really impact us as a humanity across the globe?
Simply put, yes. I mean, you and I were talking before this about, I was telling you the advice. We were talking about how technology, how is that going to affect people moving forward? I mean, you and I just talked about the example. And I would argue it's you and I that changed as much as anybody else, right? I mean, I looked at the problem of how we're going to handle a pandemic and said, do we need to be selling different products in different ways? How are our customers going to act? But then you and I had to modify the way that we manage our operations, or I would like to say lead our operations,
right,
to take advantage of the technology and the change that happened to us, right? It's the Tom Peters line. The only thing you can guarantee in business is change, unexpected change, right? It's it. So you prepare yourself for that change, not knowing that change is going to happen. back to your point, it's like Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is an easier example for me. So here, Apple just showed up at our door. We were doing work with Wi-Fi, interesting enough with Apple, why the standard was being created. And they came to us and said, hey, we have some large customers, and it's all in the public domain because it's been litigated. Monsanto came to us and said, we want a product that uses the Newton, uses the cellular system, and our people can go in the field and track crops. And next thing we knew, we had 4 or 5 of these customers, and we said, well, I guess they're asking for the cellular system, but it has to have the data infrastructure, which is just coming online in the coming months. Let's put that all in a package that's rugged, and let's send people out in the field. Did we see that you and I would be, using, these are strangely related. Yeah. In some ways, this maybe is my favorite smartphone I've ever had because I just like the Newton a lot. But my current phone does so much more than that thing could do. But we didn't have any idea. The mind can't conceive, the ears can't hear, the eye cannot see.
Right.
What's in front of us. Wi-Fi's even more interesting to me is that when I was a young man, someone's crammed in front of I'm looking for a document. Oh, I've given it to somebody. Someone crammed in my hand the doctoral dissertation of Alan Kay, the man who I quoted about technology being, indistinguishable from magic if it's advanced enough. And Alan Kay's dissertation talked about a future where we would be using Dynabooks, and he predicted the iPad, the laptop, and Wi-Fi before they existed. In a very famous, if you're a geek, he is holy. He's a holy man. I think he just resigned or just left Apple as a full fellow, but he's the man.
Wow.
And in K, when I read that dissertation, my mentor who had handed it to me, he said, dedicate the rest of your life to fulfilling this and you'll be successful. And I think that's what motivated us to do, it certainly motivated me to do this and then Wi-Fi. So the Wi-Fi standard was really created in a Kansas City company here. And we developed a chipset that ultimately sold in the open market and had 100% market share of 1/2 of the standard. And, people don't believe that happened in Kansas City. And it was, and it did well enough. And it went through some weird permutations with, it in itself would be a great nonfiction book, is because it ended up in the hands of different people with some shenanigans involved. But, we didn't see Wi-Fi. I didn't see apps on phones, right?
Right.
I'm not sure Apple saw apps on phones.
Well, one of my favorite quotes from Steve Jobs, when people said, when people told Steve Jobs that, people don't want this. And Steve Jobs says, people don't know what they want until you put it in front of them, right? And so I think that's what you're saying is, what are the possibilities of this technology? And we can't even begin to imagine how it can change what we're doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's really funny. I have a friend that I went to high school with here in Kansas City, has been wildly successful as a venture capitalist, arguably as successful as anyone I've ever met in that business. Retired, had some health problems, just a great guy. And I had called him about this business, and he wasn't investing at the time. And but we talked about it, and he said, Jeff, okay, what you're working on, the market valuations, the opportunities, the potential applications are beyond description. So stop trying to describe them. And he says, it's like Wi-Fi in the smartphone. At some point, the ear can't hear, the eye cannot see, the mind cannot conceive. Right? That's a Bible verse, but this concept of, it's beyond our imagination. I think what we're doing has such fundamentally large opportunities and value that it's beyond imagination. It would be irresponsible not to continue to accelerate and do what we do. I am so fortunate, and this is now back to the advice to my son. Find those things that make you alive and dedicate yourself to those things. Be alive, right? The glory of God is a man or woman fully alive, is the quote, right?
Right.
It's Erasmus. Let's be fully alive. I am so fortunate. I pinch myself that I have got to work on things that allow me to be fully alive. I am the most blessed of all men because I get to do something I love and hopefully makes value in the world. I mean, and I'll tell you, I found the most satisfying things I've ever worked on are the two medical devices that are somewhat associated with the work here, actually, in this very building. And because they have literally saved lives probably on a daily basis.
Now, what are those
Now,
devices?
There's something called capnography, which is the measurement of CO2. And it was created literally in this building, the building I'm in, which we rent. I mean, this is my second time in this building in 30 years. And capnography is required in all surgery. If you take your kids in to get tubes in your ears, they will hook a capnographer to your child during that almost instantaneous procedure to measure the CO2 and oxygen going in, CO2 going out. And so, but that was a Kansas City creation, literally this building. Garmin started across the street. And then when I did the next startup, moved behind us and borrowed our equipment every night. So the ecosystem in Kansas City is relatively small.
I don't think people think of Kansas City as a technology city, but what you're saying is, hey, there's some pretty cool stuff that started here.
Well, I'm not sure I would describe technology. Again, it's back to our example of technology. I mean, there's a startup culture here in Kansas City, as there is in most cities. And it's somewhat split between the new guard and the old guard. The old guard largely doesn't talk about it. They just go about doing it. And the new guard spends a lot of time talking about it. And again, there's nothing wrong with talking about it. I'm not saying it. I used to be on lots of boards, from, Johnson County Enterprise Center, K-Tech, KU's on incubator, all kinds of stuff. And I'll tell you, at the end of the day, I think it was all valuable time spent, but I found myself largely frustrated and empty. And I felt I could do more to create value in my home city by just doing it, right? I generally don't do interviews. If it didn't, the fact that you knew my family, I wouldn't do this interview, to be honest with you. I just don't do it.
Well, I appreciate you doing. I mean, I'm fascinated when I learned from your father what you do, and when I watched the video and I went to your website, I'm like, wow, this is really, really cool, and I want to interview Jeff. And some of the people in my organization said, well, what does this have to do with a guided retirement show? And I'm like, it's about life. It's about how technology is changing things, and I think that we have to continue to be ready to adapt to that new technology. You talked about artificial intelligence. You got AI now in the investing world, and AI in the investing world's doing some pretty cool things that prior to that was unthinkable. And so I think that there's just so much. And I really wanted to get the point across is that things are going to be changing, and I like to look forward. I want to look at the big picture of life, and I like to imagine life in a way that is ideal, right? What do I really want my life to look like? And then how do I make that happen? And I think that's what you're doing with technology is what are the issues that are out there? How can I make things better? And that's what you're doing. Even though you don't really see what's the ultimate end result going to wind up being, like with the startup of the smartphone, how would anybody have ever imagined that it would turn into what it is today? With the technology that you have today, what is the possibilities and where will that go and how will that change? I mean, I'm just thinking about, people that are doing a inspection in a home, trying to get an appraisal on a home or a piece of business property or something like that. If your drones can fly in and they can check everything out and they can look at the plumbing and they can look at the lighting and they can do all these different things, we might be able to, appraise homes from afar.
Yeah, it's really funny. I have a dear friend. It's like a sister relationship in town, and she lives close to my wife and I, and she was having horrible health problems. Turns out she just has, gargantuan mold allergies, and she had a crawl space and it was full of mold. And before I knew it, she had somebody come in. But if I had known that, I would have flown in her mold space with one of the drones and just looked for her. And so we were talking about it afterwards, the same way you and I as friends are talking, where we said, look, in the future, someone's going to pull out of the back of their pickup this thing, and it's just going to automatically fly in that crawl space in their Brookside home and see whether there's mold or not. By the way, that half of her home, or that part of her home, no longer exists. They had to tear it down. It was so full of mold for her health. So yeah, I mean, again, our eyes have not seen, our ears have not heard.
Right.
We have not conceived what the future looks like. All I know in my little way that, you prayerfully get up in the morning and, let me be a thoughtful, decent leader. Let me serve the people I work with and my investors. Let me do something of value today and tomorrow. One of my axioms, and you could probably figure this out, I have these quotes that I roll off of me from years of reading too much. And I don't know if it's Marcus Aurelius or who the quote comes from. It's never been properly tagged, though I read it for the first time. It's chiseled into the stones at Union Station in DC. And it simply says, big visions that create the magic that stirs the souls of men. Big visions create the magic that stirs the souls of men. And by the way, I even ended up spending a plane flight, a long one, with the architect of Congress, which is the guy who manages all of the properties in DC in the federal domain. He was absolutely aware of that. He called me back a couple weeks later and he says, I can't give you a source no one knows.
That's wild.
But big visions create the magic that stirs the souls of men. Of course, in our politically correct world, we would say big visions create the magic that stirs the souls of men and women. And that's great. But the point is, let us work on good, big things. And I think at the end, technology in the end should be a people business. I'm a people person. I want to make the world safe. I want to be able to, inspect the Fukushima plant without sending someone into harm's way. I want to be able to make bridges safer. I want to be able to do a mold inspection where drones have never flown before. Did I think about that before last week with this conversation with a friend? No, never occurred to me.
Right.
And I guarantee you it's only Wednesday, and sometime by Friday, 3 more things are going to come up that I have never thought of.
That's the beauty. That's the beauty of where we are in this world today, though, is that there are some. I mean, if you can imagine it, you almost think, hey, it can happen.
Well, Hayek, the famous Nobel laureate in economics, talked about, and I forget his phrase, but it's this argument of why capitalism works, is that it is the power. There's a famous Tom Peters quote, is that all great inventions almost always usually come from the wrong person at the wrong time in the wrong division with the wrong budget. Post-it pads came from a guy who was playing with a failed adhesive, right? And he wanted to mark the hymnals of his church as they were singing. That's how post-it pads was invented. And it's Hayek's argument that central planning doesn't work for exactly the reason we're talking about. You can't conceive where the ideas are coming from. And so we try to, I think wisdom is to prepare yourself for them and be humble enough to recognize when you miss or when you hit them, to be gracious about, I'm at a fortunate spot at a fortunate time with really bright people. That's it.
And you have to surround yourself with those bright people, and you have to be willing to accept the fact that, hey, you know what, they're going to help me get better, and they're going to help everybody get better. Well,
and bright people in itself is a different paradigm. I mean, Google almost failed because they had an axiom of wanting to hire the top 1% brightest programmers and people, and it was a miserable failure for them. And so then they woke up and said, it's really a lot more about people who can also work together, who can collaborate, and getting a whole team that has all the skill sets in it. It's a well-documented thing. And, so you try to, we have probably more PhDs per capita than is probably any company in the city. But that doesn't mean that the guy or gal without the college degree isn't going to be, the key inventor on an issue, because that's the case. I marvel. Again, some of the smartest things come from the most unlikely sources. So how do you build a team? And we were arguing the other day, as you do once a year, about what's your visions and values. and one of a relatively new guy we have, who by the way has a PhD in particle physics from Duke, he was arguing the power of our culture is exactly what I just said, is it's not that we're just a group of smart people, but we're a group of people that are highly collaborative and know how to work together. And again, we fight and argue.
Well, that's how you make progress.
I think so, but not all cultures are that way. And again, as I say this, I don't want to sound egotistical, like I'm the king of this culture. Cultures are things. I've learned the hard way. If you don't meticulously manage them, when I say manage, I mean, just be attentive to them, I guess, you'll fail. I mean, I thought I was, Midas after a couple of these startups. And I had one where I didn't pay attention to the culture, and it was an awful culture. And so as I get older, I pay attention to, how lucky I was at so young in life, and to pay attention to the culture.
That's perfect. Jeff, you've been gracious with your time and your expertise and your knowledge. We're going to make sure that we put links to your website so that people can really check out what you've got going on. I can't wait to see where your company goes, how this technology impacts the lives of people across the globe. It's fascinating to spend time speaking with somebody like you, somebody who really cares and somebody who has that vision to make our world a better place. I appreciate it.
Okay, tell my dad hi.
I will. I will. And I'll tell him what a great job he did raising you.
Okay, thanks. He might not believe you.
Do I give him the credit? We'll make his day. How about that?
He's actually a great guy. And I was just telling him the other day, I mean, really late last week, I had to pause and thank him. I just said, Dad, some of my best, sorry, I'm tearing up. I said, some of my best attributes I get from you. And Mom was so much the dominant personality in our household. But, I just said, Dad, I want to be thankful for a minute. And I think he needed that.
That's awesome.
And he's easy to overlook for that stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We've put links to the website of Digital Aerolus in the show notes here of the Guided Retirement Show. If you're like me, I'm going to spend some time on that website. I'm going to be doing research. I'm going to be paying attention to what Jeff Alholm and his group of PhDs are doing at Digital Aerolus, and I can't wait to see how their productivity, their knowledge, and their technology changes the world. If you enjoyed this program, make sure you subscribe to the Guided Retirement Show. All of our viewers on YouTube, make sure to give us a thumbs up, share this with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and also share the podcast with your friends. And if you haven't listened to all of the episodes of the Guided Retirement Show, spend some time with me and join me in a great educational experience as we continue the Guided Retirement Show.
Investment advisory services offered through Barber Financial Group and SEC registered investment advisor.
Starting your route to retirement.